Behind the already well-known records of Jesus' life, there is a deep layer of events that have never been fully explained. From his first public steps to his last moments in Gethsemane, there lingers an essential doubt that few dare to touch. With whom, in fact, did Jesus converse in his silences? What voices were these that guided him, advised him, and strengthened him when no one else was present? In various biblical passages, there are references to messages coming from above, to direct guidance from the Father, and to the constant presence of a wisdom that did not seem to spring from the material world. But could all this be just metaphor, or veiled evidence that he communed with something, or someone, beyond the reality we know? During his journey, Jesus often distanced himself from the crowds. He climbed mountains, sought out desolate places, and immersed himself in lengthy periods of solitary prayer. This recurring behavior raises important questions. What exactly was happening during these moments? Was he simply reflecting or connecting with subtler spheres of existence? For those who see beyond the literal surface of the sacred texts, these episodes suggest something much deeper: a direct communication with interdimensional spiritual orders, entities that do not belong to Earth, but operate as cosmic mentors, assisting in the evolution of human consciousness. One of the most emblematic passages is that of his baptism, where a voice echoes from the heavens saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." This sound manifestation without a visible source is treated with naturalness by the Gospels. But it is anything but common. In a world where the sky rarely speaks, this moment reveals the existence of a non-human intelligence that accompanied and validated the presence of Jesus. The question that arises is, could this voice be that of God in his supreme form, or of an intermediary consciousness, a spiritual order that operated as a divine instrument? In Jewish tradition, it is common to have spiritual figures, the Malachim, who serve as messengers and channels between worlds. The prophets often reported hearing what they called the voice of God, but the details of these experiences are so intense and vivid that many contemporary scholars interpret them as interactions with non-terrestrial intelligences. If the prophets heard these voices, why not Jesus? Furthermore, considering the level of consciousness expansion he demonstrated, could it be possible that he was in contact with an even higher hierarchy, perhaps never accessed by another human being before him? There are moments when Jesus seems to be speaking with someone invisible around him. In the episode of Lazarus's resurrection, before performing the miracle, he lifts his eyes to the heavens and says, "Father, I thank you for hearing me. I know that you always hear me." He is declaring in front of the crowd that this communication is not new. It is a constant practice. There is a close relationship with a force beyond the human, but which also responds, dialogues, and acts. This type of relationship is rarely mentioned in detail, but the subtlety of Jesus' words suggests that he was speaking with something much greater than just an abstract concept of God. It is no coincidence that he constantly repeated, "I and the Father are one." This fusion between human identity and universal consciousness raises the possibility that his mind was merged, at deep levels, with interdimensional realities. Jesus not only accessed these spheres, he was a living extension of them, an embodied antenna, a point of anchorage between the density of the physical world and the softness of the higher realms. And this leads us to wonder, who else was part of this invisible current? Was there a hidden brotherhood supporting his mission? In some ancient mystical traditions, there is talk of a celestial order composed of highly evolved consciousnesses, whose function is to guide civilizations at key moments in their history. These orders do not physically manifest themselves, but communicate through visions, dreams, revelations, and altered states of consciousness. Could it be possible that Jesus was in alignment with one of these orders? That his decisions, words, and actions were partly inspired, co-constructed with invisible intelligences operating outside of linear time? When we look at Jesus' 33 years of life, we realize that there are significant gaps, especially between the ages of 12 and 30. The silence about this period is disconcerting. Some scholars suggest that he might have traveled to Egypt, India, or even Tibet, where he would have been initiated into advanced spiritual schools. But what if, during these years, he was being prepared by a spiritual order that did not belong to this world? What if he was being trained by consciousnesses that operated outside of the earthly grid? The idea of interdimensional spiritual mentors is not exclusive to Christianity. In indigenous, African Vedanta traditions, and even in ancient civilizations such as Atlantis and Lemuria, there are accounts of star beings who guided spiritual leaders. These mentors were described as beings of light, who did not speak through words, but through vibration. When we look at this from this perspective, Jesus' mystical experiences gain a new layer of meaning. His moments of silence, his gaze lost on the horizon, his words loaded with profound truths. All of this points to a contact with levels of wisdom that go beyond the common human experience. It's essential to remember that many of Jesus' teachings were only understood, or rather partially understood, centuries after his death. This reveals how much his source of knowledge transcended the culture of his time. It was as if he was transmitting codes that could only be deciphered by more prepared consciousnesses in the future, a sort of timeless spiritual legacy. But if he was speaking with entities from other planes, who were these voices? And what were they telling him during the most decisive moments of his journey? And this is where we begin to touch the heart of the mystery. Jesus did not walk alone. At many critical moments in his journey, there are subtle but powerful indications that he was in constant dialogue with greater forces, not just praying, but receiving answers, not just seeking, but being guided. A master who not only taught, but channeled something much broader, deeper, and cosmic. A being who perhaps did not come to teach a religion, but to remind us that there is an entire universe of consciousness waiting for our listening. And so we conclude this first part, planting the seed of the great mystery. Were the voices that spoke to Jesus truly from God, or were they echoes of a celestial order beyond our understanding? In the next chapters, we will explore the most mystical moments of Jesus' life, delve into forgotten traditions, and connect clues left throughout history. Prepare to discover that the invisible, in truth, has always been among us. The desert, a space of apparent emptiness, where silence screams and sand whispers ancient secrets. It was in this inhospitable, dry, and isolated setting that Jesus spent 40 days fasting, praying, and being tested. But what lies behind this symbolic retreat? For most, this moment represents merely a stage of spiritual preparation. But for those who look beyond the veil of literalness, the 40 days in the desert hide much more. An interdimensional rite of passage, a journey between worlds. It wasn't just a test of the flesh. It was a portal between human consciousness and the celestial orders that operate outside of matter. The scriptures report that Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. This phrase, often overlooked, brings a crucial detail. He did not go on his own. He was guided, led, by a force that was guiding him. Here already suggests an invisible action, a spiritual entity directing his steps. The verb to lead implies intentionality. Jesus was being prepared for a type of confrontation that transcended the physical. During this period, he was tempted by Satan, but was this entity a literal being, or a symbolic force of mental and energetic resistance in the face of revelations of great magnitude? The number 40 appears repeatedly in the Bible. 40 days of flood, 40 years in the desert, 40 days of Moses on Sinai. In all these occurrences, the number represents transformation, a complete cycle of symbolic death of the ego and spiritual rebirth. And it is precisely this pattern that Jesus seems to follow. But what the Bible does not detail are the types of visions, encounters, and communications that he would have experienced during this isolation. Did Jesus access other realities? Did his spirit leave the body in states of deep meditation, making contact with entities outside of our dimension? During this fast, the mind and body enter altered states. Neurochemically, food deprivation and deep introspection can induce visionary experiences. But more than that, various spiritual traditions use exactly this type of practice to induce contact with extra-physical beings. Among the shamans of Siberia, the rishis of India, and the initiates of Egypt, isolation in the desert, food restriction and vigilance were tools to open the channel of communication with higher spiritual intelligences. Was Jesus at that moment undergoing a similar process? The temptation to turn stones into bread can symbolize more than a carnal hunger. It may represent the subtle invitation to manipulate spiritual power for one's own benefit, a common test for those who access cosmic forces. The challenge of throwing oneself from the pinnacle of the temple, expecting to be saved by angels, is not just a physical act, but a test on spiritual vanity. And the offer of all the kingdoms of the world, should he kneel, is the final temptation of every initiate, to surrender their mission to matter in exchange for apparent dominion. These are not earthly tests. They are dimensional challenges, faced by those who traverse the veils of illusion. If we understand that each of these temptations symbolizes a dialogue with hidden forces, both of light and shadow, we begin to realize that Jesus, at that moment, was not alone in the desert. There was an invisible arena of spiritual intelligences there, some testing his integrity, others preparing him for the mission of radiating a new consciousness on earth. By overcoming these temptations, he was not only proving his moral strength, but demonstrating that he was capable of maintaining the necessary frequency to interact with interdimensional orders without corrupting himself. This 40-day period also marks a break. Before the desert, Jesus was a man among men. After the desert, he emerges as a being on a mission, with clarity about his origin and destination. Many mystical scholars assert that during this retreat, Jesus underwent a spiritual activation that definitively connected him with the Christ consciousness, a state of union with the highest spheres of the universe. This connection is not made through words, but through attunement. Jesus became an active channel of universal wisdom, a transmitter of truth that does not come from earth. The Orthodox Christian tradition, with its focus on doctrines and rituals, often avoids discussing these more mystical layers. But various Gnostic, Kabbalistic, and esoteric currents argue that Jesus had full knowledge of interdimensional structures and that part of his mission was to subtly reveal the existence of these orders of light. The desert, in this context, is not just a geographical location. It is a symbolic setting where the human soul encounters the echoes of the cosmos. Jesus was being aligned, calibrated, and awakened for what was to come. We cannot ignore that, upon leaving the desert, Jesus begins to perform miracles, to teach with authority, and to speak with disconcerting clarity about the kingdom of God. This kingdom, according to him, does not come with outward appearance and is within you. Such statements are not religious allegories but vibrational clues. He was describing levels of reality that are only accessible when the ego dissolves and the soul aligns with higher frequencies. Jesus had crossed a threshold. Not only had he overcome temptations, but he had established a bridge between worlds. Various mystics claim that in the desert, Jesus made direct contact with the order of the Seraphim, one of the highest celestial hierarchies. Other sources suggest that he interacted with consciousnesses from the Sirius constellation or the Universal White Brotherhood. Different names, perhaps, for the same truth. He was communing with intelligences that inhabit higher planes and that follow the evolution of Earth. Celestial voices, yes, but that echo beyond common religiosity, guiding planetary cycles and awakened souls. What remains for us then is to acknowledge that the desert was not just a time of trial. It was a spiritual laboratory, a moment of profound vibrational realignment where Jesus accessed the dimensions from which his greatest teachings would come. And it was also a rehearsal for the cross. For those who pass through the invisible portals must first die to the old world. There, in the absolute silence, Jesus' mind resonated with the cosmic codes of love, compassion, and eternal truth. And when he returned, he was no longer the same. He was someone who had spoken with the invisible and decided to follow its call. Long before Jesus walked through Galilee, there are echoes of a mysterious presence already operating between the lines of the scriptures. The Old Testament, filled with symbolism and enigmas, presents one of the most controversial and fascinating words in the Hebrew tradition, Elohim. Normally translated as God, this word appears in the plural and carries with it an ambiguity that challenges simple interpretations. Who, after all, are the Elohim? Would they be connected to the same spiritual order with which Jesus would have communed? Or would they be a separate hierarchy, guardians of ancient interdimensional planes, whose echoes still resonated in the times of the Messiah? The word Elohim appears more than 2,000 times in the Old Testament. In Hebrew, it is a plural form of Eloah, but interestingly, it is used with singular verbs, creating a linguistic and theological paradox. Why is this plurality embedded in the very nature of the Creator? Many traditional theologians interpret this as a plural of majesty, an expression of reverence. But other scholars, especially Kabbalists, Gnostics, and researchers of esoteric traditions, see in this plural a clear indication of a plurality of consciousnesses. Not a solitary God, but a council of divine intelligences, a heavenly order that acts in unison. This interpretation changes everything. If the Elohim are a collective, a fraternity of superior beings, it suggests that since the beginning of time, there has been a group guiding the creation and evolution of consciousness on Earth. Furthermore, this group could very well have continued its work throughout the centuries, acting through prophets, visionaries, and spiritual masters. Moses, for example, spoke with a burning bush that did not consume itself, and heard instructions from an invisible voice. This same presence is described as Elohim in Hebrew texts. Could the Elohim be the invisible mentors behind the great revelations? Throughout the Old Testament, we see a recurring relationship between the Elohim and luminous manifestations, such as pillars of fire, speaking clouds, voices from heaven, and vivid dreams. These elements are characteristic of interdimensional manifestations, where the energy density of the beings prevents a full manifestation, but allows for perceptible signs, symbols, and codes. It is no different than what Jesus experiences centuries later: voices from heaven, transfiguration, encounters with beings of light. The pattern repeats itself, revealing a hidden continuity of spiritual guidance from the patriarchs to Christ. When Jesus mentions that he came to fulfill the law and the prophets, he is acknowledging his insertion into a previous spiritual lineage, but not merely as religious continuity. He is referring to a cosmic tradition, a stream of wisdom transmitted through the ages by the same spiritual source. This source, which he calls Father, could very well be related to the order of the Elohim, not in the anthropomorphic sense, but as a universal consciousness manifested through multiple aspects, each with a specific function in the construction and awakening of the human soul. The Elohim in this context would be like cosmic architects, guardians of universal laws, designers of intelligent life, mentors of the rise of consciousness. Jesus, when entering into communion with this order, would not be worshiping it, but tuning into its field of intelligence, a field that transcends religious limitations and embraces all beings who aspire to unity, truth, and unconditional love. The Father that Jesus invokes so frequently may not be an isolated entity, but the vibrational totality of this order, a living mind in constant expansion. In Genesis, there is a moment that echoes this idea with unsettling clarity. When the human being is about to eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge, the Elohim say, Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. This us is revealing. It suggests not only a plurality, but also a hierarchy of knowledge. Furthermore, it indicates that the human being has the potential to access the same level of consciousness. What Jesus did, in essence, was to realize this potential, embodying the consciousness of an Elohim, becoming, in fact, one with the order. This understanding redefines the miracles and teachings of Jesus. His healings, materializations, visions, and words of wisdom would not be unique gifts, but expressions of alignment with this higher intelligence. He operated within the laws of the universe, but from a state of consciousness rarely accessed by others. The Elohim, in this sense, would not be worshipped, but integrated. They are part of the Christic field, the cosmic intelligence that we can all participate in when we surpass the limits of the ego and open ourselves to pure love. It's interesting to note that even after the ascension of Jesus, his disciples continued to experience spiritual manifestations reminiscent of those described in the Old Testament. Pentecost, for example, is an event that recalls the appearances of the Elohim, tongues of fire, voices, mutual understanding in different languages. This suggests that contact with this order did not cease with Jesus' departure, but continued, now accessible to those who had vibrationally risen to receive it. The order remained active, accompanying humanity in its tentative steps towards enlightenment. This view also sheds new light on the concept of the kingdom of heaven. Jesus asserts that this kingdom is not outside, but within us. This is not merely a metaphor, it's a vibrational key. The Elohim, or the order that represents them, do not dwell in a physical location, but a frequency, a band of consciousness that can be accessed internally. Thus, the kingdom of heaven is the state of attunement with this order. It's where Jesus resided, even while in flesh. It's the original home of the awakened soul. We have arrived, then, at a profound and provocative conclusion. Jesus' relationship with the divine was, in fact, a relationship with an interdimensional spiritual structure that operates beyond common human understanding. The order of the Elohim, present since Genesis, reveals itself as the invisible foundation upon which Christ's mission was built. Furthermore, this order remains alive, present, waiting for more consciousnesses to awaken to its presence. And if the Elohim still speak, who is willing to listen? Against the backdrop of the Roman world, dominated by brutality, political disputes, and institutionalized religiosity, there was a silent community, removed from the cities, whose routine was not oriented towards power, but towards the sacred. They were the Essenes, an enigmatic people living on the fringes of the system, guided by strict spiritual principles, mystical practices, and a greater purpose, to preserve the secrets of the soul and prepare the ground for a new consciousness on earth. Long forgotten by official history, the Essenes are now seen by many scholars as the missing link between the ancient world and the Christian awakening, and perhaps as the earthly gateway to the interdimensional orders with which Jesus communed. The Christian tradition seldom mentions them, but the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in Qumran in the 20th century, revealed to the world that the Essenes were much more than isolated monks. They followed a subtle and profound doctrine, based on harmony with the forces of the universe, purification of the body and mind, and direct contact with celestial entities. They were not just religious, but initiates, guardians of a wisdom that had been passed down since the times of Enoch and Melchizedek. In their discipline and silence, they kept a line of communication with the invisible alive. There are strong indications that Jesus had contact with the Essenes. Some texts suggest that Mary, his mother, was also connected to this community. And the principles taught by Jesus, such as love for one's neighbor, forgiveness, simplicity, connection with the inner divine, are almost perfect reflections of the Essene teachings. The moral structure of his parables, the emphasis on introspection and inner life, the pursuit of purity not only physical, but vibrational, are direct reflections of a deep spiritual formation, like the one the Essenes offered. These initiates practiced advanced techniques of meditation, fasting, and energy alignment. They would wake up before sunrise to connect with the energy of the morning light, perform daily ritual baths for spiritual cleansing, and organize their lives according to cosmic cycles. They believed that certain times of the day and year were vibrational portals, through which it was possible to access instructions directly from the higher spheres. This notion of a cosmic window reappears in the actions of Jesus, who often isolated himself during the early morning or withdrew on specific dates, in deep harmony with the flow of invisible forces. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Essenes was their belief in the existence of 12 superior forces, beings of light who acted as guides and spiritual instructors. They referred to them as brothers of light, or sons of the stars, and believed that these beings were always present, but only visible to those whose hearts were clean and vibrating at the right frequency. This idea resonates strongly with the way Jesus related to the Father, with the angels, and with the voices he heard and obeyed. Could these 12 beings be the first manifestations of the celestial order that guided him? Interestingly, the Essenes also had an extremely high ethical code. They did not kill animals, lived in harmony with nature, deeply respected the body as a temple, and taught that the kingdom of God first manifested within each human being, echoing exactly what Jesus would preach years later. They abstained from anything that clouded the mind, as they knew that only with a clear field would it be possible to capture the messages from subtle planes. Their life was a constant training for contact with the invisible, something that Jesus would have inherited as vibrational heritage. Unlike the other Jewish sects of the time, such as the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the Essenes rejected religious ostentation. For them, the connection with the divine did not require luxurious temples or bloody sacrifices. The true altar was a peaceful heart, a purified body, a quiet mind. This stance can be clearly seen in the actions of Jesus, who healed in the fields, preached on the hills, and challenged the rigid religious system of his time. He echoed, in a more expanded way, the essence of the Essene path. The ceremonies of the Essenes were also aimed at connecting with interdimensional intelligences. On specific nights, they gathered in silent circles to receive, according to their accounts, instructions from masters of the sky. These sessions of vibrational communion were not mere rituals, but energetic transmissions. Participants reported visions, lucid dreams, and clear guidance about the future. When we compare these events with moments like the Transfiguration of Jesus or his solitary nights in prayer, the similarity is striking. He was replicating ancestral practices, adapted to his mission. The influence of the Essenes on the formation of Jesus, therefore, was not only ideological, but also technological in a spiritual sense. They provided the tools for direct contact with other dimensions: vibrational diet, conscious breathing, sacred geometry, sound, light, and silence. It's plausible that Jesus was initiated into these practices, and from them, reached states of consciousness where he became receptive to heavenly voices. Perhaps he was even prepared by these higher orders through the Essenes themselves. Your Gospels are filled with codes that refer to this tradition: the bread, the wine, the living water, the inner temple, the body as God's dwelling. All of these are images also found in the Qumran texts, the same ones used by the Essenes. This convergence points to something much larger than coincidence. It points to the presence of a secret line of wisdom, silently upheld for centuries, waiting for a moment when it could be brought to light by a being capable of understanding and living its fullness. The Essenes never sought fame. Their mission was to prepare the ground. As guardians of the invisible, they knew that one day someone would emerge who would unite heaven and earth with total consciousness. This someone, for many of them, was Jesus. They not only anticipated him, they awaited him. And in preparing him, They opened the channel for him to become the convergence point between the interdimensional spiritual orders and incarnate humanity. Thus, we understand that without the Essenes, perhaps there would not be Christ as we know him. They were the fertile soil where the divine seed could sprout, and their silent legacy still echoes today, calling those who hear the voices of the invisible to awaken. There are moments in the life of a spiritual master that do not belong to history, but to eternity. Moments that tear the fabric of ordinary reality and reveal what is usually veiled to the eyes of humanity. One of these moments is the transfiguration of Jesus on Mount Tabor, described with reverence in the Gospels, but often misunderstood in its spiritual depth. The narrative is clear. Jesus ascends the mountain with Peter, James, and John, and before them, he transforms. His face shines like the sun, his clothes become white as light, and two figures appear by his side, Moses and Elijah. A luminous cloud envelops the place, and once again, a heavenly voice manifests. What is really happening here? The traditional explanation views the Transfiguration as an isolated miracle, a glimpse of Jesus' divine nature. But what if this view is just the shell of a much larger mystery? And what if what we witnessed there was, in fact, a conscious full channeling of interdimensional intelligences through Jesus' vibrational field? Not just an external phenomenon, but an alignment between planes, a fusion between Christ's consciousness and the higher spheres guiding him. Let's take this step by step. The choice of a mountaintop is not random. Since ancient times, mountains have been considered points of spiritual access, places of lesser energetic interference, where the sky seems closer and the noise of the world dissolves. Moses received the 10 Commandments on a mount. Elijah heard the still, small voice of the Eternal on another. And now, Jesus ascends with his disciples. This pattern is not geographical, it's symbolic and vibrational. The mountain represents the elevated state of consciousness necessary to witness the sacred, and it is in this space that reality is suspended. When light emanates from Jesus, it's not just an external glow, it's a frequency shift. His energy field expands to such an extent that it becomes visible, visibly luminous. This is reported in various mystical traditions as a sign of a body in vibrational transition. The physical body, still present, begins to vibrate at a subtler density, making room for the manifestation of higher intelligences. This phenomenon is known by some as the light body or glorified body. Jesus is not showing power. He is revealing his true interdimensional nature. The appearance of Moses and Elijah adds another mystical layer to the event. Both are figures who, according to tradition, did not die in the usual way. Elijah was taken to heaven in a chariot of fire. Moses had a mysterious death, his body never being found. These characteristics associate them with elevated states of existence, beings that moved between worlds. They are not there as ghosts. They are there as timeless consciousnesses participating in Christ's cosmic mission. The Transfiguration, in this sense, is an interdimensional council gathering around Jesus, an alignment of intelligences. The voice echoing from the cloud is, once again, a connecting point with previous events. In baptism, in the desert, and now on the mountain, this voice returns, always validating, always confirming. But there is a subtle and crucial detail. The voice comes from the cloud, an ancient symbol of divine presence, but also a typical description of condensed energetic manifestations. In texts from various cultures, luminous clouds are portals, vessels, or energy fields where elevated beings manifest. The cloud of the Transfiguration can be understood as a vehicle of consciousness, an interface between planes. The disciples present do not fully understand what they see. They are astounded, prostrating themselves in fear. And it is here that the symbolic genius of the event is revealed. Not everyone can witness the interdimensional without preparation. Even Peter, James, and John, the closest to Jesus, are overtaken by fear in the face of the greatness of what they witness. This shows us that the vibrational elevation required for such contact is not trivial. Purity, inner silence, surrender are needed. Jesus, on the other hand, is completely at peace. He inhabits that space with familiarity, as if he has been there many times before. The question that arises is, what in fact happened on that mountain? Was it a preview of the resurrection, a miracle to strengthen the disciples' faith, or an interdimensional connection event in which Jesus opened his vibrational field to be traversed by higher consciousness? Perhaps the Elohim themselves, the Brothers of Light, or another celestial order that accompanied him. Everything indicates that the Transfiguration was a living, conscious, and intentional channeling. Jesus became, for a few moments, a translucent mirror, allowing the invisible worlds to reveal themselves. This type of phenomenon is also described by Tibetan mystics, Egyptian initiates, and Indian yogis. There are accounts of masters whose bodies emit intense light during states of ecstasy, whose countenance changes when incorporating subtle energies. These are records of high-level channeling, where the soul becomes receptive to higher vibrations. What Jesus did on the mountain was exactly this, but to a degree rarely seen: a total integration between his consciousness and the universal consciousness, witnessed by his disciples. The intent of the event was not theatrical either. Jesus was not showing off powers. He was transmitting vibrational codes, initiating his disciples into a greater reality. It was an invitation for them to also seek this connection, this fusion with the divine. The Transfiguration marks a watershed. From then on, there would be no more doubt about the Master's transcendental nature. He was more than a prophet, more than a healer. He was a meeting point between dimensions, a permanent channel between heaven and earth. The symbolism of the place, the elements present, the impact caused, everything points to an advanced spiritual technology, which Jesus mastered skillfully. The event cannot be reduced to a metaphor or just a miraculous intervention. It is a vibrational map, a demonstration that a human being, upon reaching certain levels of consciousness, can access parallel realities, converse with cosmic intelligences, and bring the invisible to light. This is what Jesus was teaching, using his own body as an instrument. And at the center of it all, the voice remains. The one that says, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." The phrase is not a religious command, it's a vibrational reminder. Listen to the one who is aligned with the whole. Listen to the one who has become one with the invisible. The voice speaks not only to the disciples, but to all of us, and it echoes to this day, waiting for us to recognize it. From the first records of his words, Jesus made it clear that he spoke not only as a man, but as something much broader. "Before Abraham was, I am," he once asserted, causing astonishment and indignation. This statement was not just bold, it was a revelation. He was not referring to his body, to the carpenter from Nazareth, but to the timeless consciousness that inhabited him. A cosmic spark, a universal presence that manifested through him. It was the Christ, not as a surname, but as a vibrational state. And this distinction between Jesus, the man, and Christ, the cosmic consciousness, is one of the deepest keys to his entire mission. Understanding Christ as a universal force is to comprehend that Jesus was a channel of the universal mind. He spoke with authority, not through imposition, but by direct resonance with the source of life. Each of his words, every gesture, every silence, was a reflection of a field of consciousness that transcends time, form, and identity. Christ did not begin with Jesus, nor did it end with him. It is an eternal frequency, which manifests whenever a soul fully aligns with absolute love and truth. Jesus was the perfect mirror of this frequency, the purest transmitter who has ever walked among us. This awareness is not the property of a single religion. Christ does not belong to Christianity. The term in its origin means anointed, the one who has received the oil of consecration, the vibrational seal of union with the divine. But this seal is not symbolic. It manifests as an expanded state of perception in which the individual merges with the unified consciousness. In Eastern traditions, this state is called samadhi. Among the Egyptians, it was the state of Sara, the son of light. In all mystical cultures, there are accounts of beings who have achieved this condition, but Jesus took this state to the pinnacle, becoming the living bridge between the finite and the infinite. Many of Jesus' teachings can only be understood from this perspective. When he says, "The Father is in me and I am in the Father," he is describing a quantum entanglement of consciousness. He had become the vortex where the universal mind could express itself directly. This level of fusion is only possible when the ego completely dissolves and the soul surrenders to the divine flow without resistance. At this point, the individual I transforms into the I am, not as personal identity, but as absolute presence. The Christ, then, is not a person, but a field, and Jesus was the clearest channel through which this field shone. That's why he spoke with such certainty about the kingdom of heaven, not as a distant place, but as a state of consciousness accessible here and now. He said, "The kingdom of God is within you." This within does not only mean emotional interiority, but a vibrational core of connection with the universal mind. Jesus had unrestricted access to this space. He lived in the world, but anchored in the eternal. He walked among men, but vibrated with the stars. And by stating that everyone could do greater works than these, he was reminding us that this connection is possible for all. This cosmic view also changes the way we understand miracles. They were not breaches of natural laws, but manifestations of higher laws operating through a being aligned with the whole. Healing, multiplying, calming storms. All of this was possible because Jesus operated outside the field of separation. He saw the essential unity between everything. Matter for him was not an obstacle, but an expression of spirit. When he touched the blind, he did not impose power, but reactivated a dormant code in the other's body, reminding him of his divine origin. The higher self of Jesus was not a philosophical abstraction. It was an active, conscious presence that constantly guided him. In moments of doubt, he withdrew in prayer, not to seek external answers, but to reconnect with this cosmic mind. The Father, as he called it, was not a distant figure, but the primordial source, the universal intelligence that permeates everything. And by merging with this source, Jesus not only received guidance, but became its very manifestation in human form. He was at the same time the channel and the content, the messenger and the message. This understanding also clarifies why he refused titles and acknowledgments. When they called him Good Master, he would respond, "Why do you call me good? There is only one who is good." This response was not common humility but full cosmic consciousness. He knew that the I was merely a vehicle. The goodness, wisdom, love that flowed through him came from the One. Jesus did not seek his own glory because he already dwelled in the eternal splendor of the universal mind. His mission was not to be adored, but to inspire humanity to rediscover this same state. On many occasions, he speaks about the Spirit of truth that would come after him, and that would guide men to all truth. This can be understood as the continuation of the cosmic Christ's action through time. The truth, for him, was not a dogma, but a vibrational field accessible to those who live in love, humility, and alignment with the divine. He knew that his physical presence was fleeting, but that the Christ consciousness would continue to act, awakening beings, inspiring movements, igniting hearts. This Christ consciousness is not limited to a historical figure. It is active everywhere there is compassion, wisdom, and presence. When someone heals with love, teaches with truth, listens with empathy, they are being a vehicle of Christ. And this was Jesus' greatest legacy, to show that the Christ-like nature is our forgotten heritage, our natural state, hidden by layers of fear, guilt, and ignorance. His life was a vibrational reminder of what we are in essence, and what we can become when we awaken. And that's why he said, "Be perfect as your Father is perfect," not as a demand, but as a call to awaken. He knew that we are more than body, more than history, more than identity. We are unique expressions of the same source, holograms of primordial love, conscious particles of the universal mind. And he came to remind us of that. He came not to create a religion, but to rekindle the divine spark that dwells in every soul. Thus, as we contemplate Christ in Jesus, we recognize the grandeur of a being who lived fully merged with the cosmic consciousness, a being who did not come from outside, but from the center of everything, who did not perform miracles, but awakened memories, who did not seek followers, but conscious creators, and who still calls us today, not to worship him, but to also be light in the world. There is an ancient wisdom that says, when the mouth is silent, the sky speaks. Jesus understood this viscerally. In a noisy world, saturated with words, he chose silence as a bridge to the divine. And it was not an empty silence, but a vibrational space of access, a refined technique of alignment with higher orders. Those who observe him carefully in the Gospels notice that, before each transformative gesture, there is always a retreat. Before the multiplication of the loaves, he looks up. Before resurrecting Lazarus, he gives thanks in silence. Before facing the cross, he isolates himself to pray. These are not formal devotional acts. They are activators of connection with the interdimensional plane. Jesus knew that the mind, when quieted, becomes a channel. That's why his spiritual practice was not one of excess, but of listening. Silence was not the absence of speech, but the presence of attunement. He operated like an antenna sensitive to the impulses of the universal mind, and this sensitivity did not come from a random gift, but from deep practices, many of which were inherited from traditions like the Essenes, the prophets, and the mystics of the East. Breathing consciously, fasting, keeping the body clean, withdrawing at specific times of the day, all of this was part of a vibrational realignment system. Among spiritual initiates, there is a clear understanding. The body is an energetic instrument. If the instrument is out of tune, due to dense nutrition, unpurified emotions, or imbalanced thoughts, spiritual reception is distorted. Jesus lived simply, ate sparingly, did not indulge in excesses. His lifestyle was an energy-tuning technology, which allowed him to keep the channel open, and it was this state of profound presence that made him receptive to the instructions of the celestial orders with which he communed. Prayer, for example, was not a desperate plea for Jesus, but a way of internal adjustment. He said, "When you pray, go into your room and with the door closed, pray to your Father in secret." This room is literal, but also symbolic. It represents the inner space of silence, where the mind calms and the soul listens. He did not teach automatic repetitions, but a state of vibrational surrender. Prayer, in this sense, was a meeting point between the self and the whole, a silent language made of intention, vibration, and presence. Another essential element in Jesus' practice was conscious breathing. Although not described in detail in the Gospels, his Oriental and Essene influence suggests that he mastered this technique. In moments of high tension, he did not react with agitation, but with paused breathing and centering. Breathing, when done with intention, is a bridge between the body and the soul. It calms the nervous system, harmonizes the electromagnetic field, and opens space for subtle perception. Many spiritual masters assert that the divine breath, the ruach in Hebrew, is accessed through full breathing. Furthermore, Jesus deeply valued the use of sound and vibration. When uttering words such as Talitha Kumi or Ephatha, he was not only communicating with human beings, but activating hidden vibrational codes. Sacred words carry frequencies, and when emitted by someone in a state of full alignment, they become instruments of healing and reconnection. This practice is ancient. In Egypt, India, among the Mayans, and even among the Celts, mantras, chants, and harmonic sounds were used to access subtle planes and invoke celestial presences. Jesus, when uttering specific words, was not performing magic. He was activating matrices of light. Fasting, another element present in his journey, was not just penance. It was a tool to clarify the spiritual senses. By reducing the body's density, Jesus allowed his energy field to become more translucent, more capable of receiving impulses from the cosmic consciousness. Various traditions speak of states of clairvoyance, enhanced intuition, and lucid dreams that arise during deep fasting. These states are ideal for receiving messages from interdimensional orders, and it is precisely during these periods that Jesus would retreat, withdraw from human turmoil, and immerse himself in the silence of the divine. There are also records indicating that he used touch as a spiritual technology. When he healed, he rarely used medicines. He touched. Sometimes not even that. His mere presence was enough. This reveals that his energy field was so elevated, so harmonized, that it emitted frequencies capable of rebalancing the fields of others. This type of influence is described by various esoteric schools as a vibrational coherence field, where the presence of a centered being instantly harmonizes chaotic fields around it. Jesus was this field, and his main technique was vibrational silence combined with full love. It's interesting to note that he didn't teach these techniques explicitly. He didn't write manuals nor formulas. He preferred to show by example. His silence before acting was the real instruction. The calmness in the face of chaos, the breath in response to accusation, the retreat in the face of noise. All of this was a lesson. Jesus understood that the greatest teaching is vibrational, not verbal. True wisdom is not transmitted, it radiates. And for this, internal silence is necessary. Silence as a gateway, silence as an altar. Even in the end, before the crucifixion, he chose silence. In front of Pilate, when pressured, he remained silent. Not out of cowardice, but because he knew that at that moment, no word would have the necessary frequency to be understood. His silence screamed the wisdom of the heavens. It was his last vibrational prayer, his last alliance with the invisible. He knew that silence was, ultimately, the language of the stars, the original language of creation. There where there is no sound, but where everything is sound. And this silence still echoes, in hearts that quiet down, in minds that cease the noise, in eyes that look inward. It is in this space, and only in it, that the celestial voices reveal themselves, that the interdimensional spiritual orders can be perceived, that the cosmic Christ can be accessed. Jesus did not come to fill the world with words, but to teach that the apparent emptiness is the sacred space where infinity speaks. Throughout Jesus' journey, many of the most impactful events were not those seen by the crowds, but rather those experienced in the silence of intimate encounters, where his disciples, those who walked beside him daily, were gradually introduced to a reality that escaped common logic. And although Jesus was the highest channel of the Christ consciousness, he was not the only one who listened. There are subtle and precious passages that reveal. His disciples also heard the invisible voices, also felt the presence of the beyond, and at times were directly touched by it. The most evident example of this is the episode of the Mount of Transfiguration, which we have already explored in depth. But there, something specific happens. Peter, James, and John hear a voice coming from the cloud saying, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." This voice was not a collective hallucination. It was a shared phenomenon, witnessed by 3 men at the same time, indicating that the spiritual frequency of the moment allowed the opening of an interdimensional reception portal. This shows us that, when the vibrational field is elevated, Even those who are not in full alignment can capture fragments of the divine. Another striking episode occurs during the baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist. Matthew describes that the heavens were opened and that a voice was heard, "This is my beloved Son." It was not just Jesus who heard this statement. The witnesses around, including John, who had a profound spiritual experience, recorded the same auditory manifestation. This convergence of perception shows that the energy field created by Jesus and those around him allowed for the entanglement between dimensions. It was as if the human circle was momentarily aligned with an invisible circle formed by higher intelligences. An equally enigmatic moment occurs during Jesus' prayer in John 12:28, when he cries out, "Father, glorify your name." And then, a voice came from heaven, "I have glorified it, and will glorify it again." Those around heard the voice but reacted in different ways. Some thought it was thunder, others thought it was an angel. This detail is revealing. Everyone heard something, but not everyone was prepared to interpret. This shows us that the reception of interdimensional language depends on the degree of consciousness. The more awakened disciples perceived the voice as a spiritual being, the less sensitive ones as a natural sound. This pattern of differentiated listening continues into another pivotal moment: Pentecost. There, after the ascension of Jesus, his disciples gather in prayer, and then a sound like a mighty wind fills the place. Tongues of fire appear over each of them, and they all start speaking in different languages, being understood by people from distinct nations. This passage is often treated as a miracle, but it can also be seen as the descent of a superior collective intelligence, a vibrational download from a spiritual order. The Holy Spirit, traditionally understood as the third person of the Trinity, can here be interpreted as the manifestation of a plural celestial consciousness, guiding the disciples through energetic codes. But why did only some hear and others not? Why did certain disciples like John seem more sensitive to the invisible presence? John is described as the one who laid his head on Jesus' chest, a symbol of vibrational intimacy and spiritual attunement. He was the most contemplative, the quietest. Perhaps because of this, he was chosen to receive the visions of the apocalypse, deeply symbolic revelations that could only be interpreted by someone with eyes beyond the physical. John was the first disciple to clearly hear the voices of the higher orders after Jesus' departure. Pedro, in turn, experiences his own process of opening. In the book of Acts, he has a vision in which he sees a sheet descending from the sky with various animals and hears a voice instructing him, "Peter, rise, kill, and eat." At first he resists, but understands that this was a spiritual metaphor. This experience shows that even the most rational, when persisting in the path of love and surrender, can become channels of the invisible spheres. The voice that Peter heard did not come from outside. It came from the interdimensional field where the celestial order continues to operate, even after the ascension of the physical Christ. In addition to the voices, the disciples also experienced collective intuitions, synchronicities, apparitions, revealing dreams and internal instructions. There are records that, at various times, they changed plans and routes due to spiritual guidance, like Paul, who was called to Macedonia in a vision. These events show us that the invisible circle continued to operate, guiding, protecting, inspiring. The communion with higher intelligences did not cease with the crucifixion. It expanded, multiplied, decentralized, like a network of light that began to pulse in prepared hearts. And more, the manifestation of the voices was not always auditory. Often the guidance came as an instantaneous knowledge, an inner certainty, an inexplicable clarity. This is common in communications with interdimensional orders. The language is vibrational, transmitted by feeling, image, or sudden perception. Jesus trained his disciples for this kind of listening. That's why he said, "Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear." He was not talking about physical hearing. He was talking about the ability to tune into the frequency of the divine, where instructions are not given, but recognized. And it's at this point that the invisible circle reveals itself in all its majesty, an interdimensional spiritual order that operates in a network, guiding those who are willing to listen. The disciples became living nodes of this network, and this network has expanded up to the present day. It's not necessary to be physically next to Jesus to hear the voices. You just need to align with his frequency, silence the ego, and allow the field to reveal itself. The disciples showed us this, with their flaws, doubts, fears, and yet with enough faith to listen. Thus, we understand that Jesus did not establish a religion of dogmas, but awakened a field of spiritual listening. The celestial order with which he communed became accessible to his disciples, and by extension, to all who walk with an open heart. The invisible circle was never exclusive. It only demands a price, the abandonment of internal noise. For the voices from above do not shout, they whisper in the prepared soul. From the first steps of his mission to the echo of his last words, Jesus left a vibrational trail that could not be contained by texts, doctrines, or dogmas. Behind each healing, parable, silence, and gaze was a greater purpose, a movement orchestrated not only by his soul, but by an intelligent network of cosmic consciousness operating in dimensions beyond our common perception. Jesus did not walk alone, never. And his mission, although deeply human, was also an interdimensional project, led by a celestial order, whose goal has always been to remind humanity who they really are. The intelligence that guided Jesus was alive, present, and participative. It manifested as inspiration, as intuition, as presence, but above all, as love in its purest and most impersonal form. Jesus said that he did nothing on his own, but only what he saw the Father doing. This phrase, so often overlooked, reveals a reality of continuous harmony. He was a transmitter of the cosmic will, an embodied catalyst of universal wisdom. The Father to whom he referred was not an old man seated on a heavenly throne, but the intelligent field that unites all things, that vibrates beyond time and inhabits everything that breathes, and also what does not breathe. Throughout his mission, Jesus had encounters with multiple layers of reality. He saw the invisible, spoke with the spheres, accessed unmanifested timelines. He knew, for instance, about the destruction of the temple, the suffering that was to come, the betrayals, and the cynical laughter of ignorance. But he remained steadfast, for his confidence was not rational, it was cosmic. He knew he was speaking with intelligences that saw the whole, that understood the collective karma of humanity, that operated in complex networks of love and healing. His decisions, often misunderstood, were responses to vibrational commands far beyond human logic. And so we ask ourselves, what was the true purpose of this cosmic mission? Why did such a high consciousness submit itself to the density of matter, the brutality of men, the forgetting of the origin? The answer may be hidden in one of his simplest phrases. I came so that they may have life, and have it abundantly. The life he referred to was not just survival, but awakened life, conscious, reconnected to the divine origin. He came not to save us from hell, but to free us from the illusion of separation. The incarnated Christ was a reminder. You are more than a body, more than a name, more than pain. You are light in manifestation. This light, however, needs to be activated, and for that, it was necessary for someone to live through the entire process, from incarnation to the cross, from despair to surrender, from death to resurrection. Jesus' journey was a cosmic script, played out on the terrestrial stage, with each act carrying multiple layers of meaning. The cross, for instance, was not just an instrument of torture, it was a dimensional portal, a transition between planes. By crossing it with full consciousness, Jesus demonstrated that death is not the end, but the turning point back home. Moreover, he activated universal codes of resurrection in the Earth's energy field. This activation was not just symbolic. Since then, Many beings have begun to report communion with higher intelligences, mystical experiences, spontaneous healings, and sudden awakenings. Jesus' mission created a rupture in the veil between dimensions, allowing the celestial order to become more accessible to all those who sincerely seek. And this continues to happen. Whenever someone silences, loves unconditionally, serves others with truth, a fragment of this intelligence manifests. The order has never ceased its operation. It simply waits for available receivers. Another essential point is the clarity of Jesus in never claiming exclusivity. He said, "You are God's." This phrase is not a figure of speech. It's a vibrational affirmation. He recognized the divine seed in every human being. He knew that what differentiated him from others was not the origin, as we all come from the source, but the level of remembrance and surrender. Jesus remembered who he was, and therefore could perform miracles, forgive without limits, love unconditionally. He wanted everyone else to also remember, and that's why he never established a religion. His invitations were simple, direct, universal. Follow me. Abide in me. Do as I have done to you. Your mission was not to convert, but to awaken consciousness. Through contact with him, people would remember. They felt seen, heard, touched by something they couldn't name, but that awakened them. It wasn't charisma. It was pure energy field. It was the resonance of the celestial order through a human body, and this can, and should, happen again, whenever there is a heart clean enough to sustain this frequency. Therefore, Jesus' mission did not end on the cross, nor in the resurrection. It continues to pulse, in the silent voice that guides those who pray with sincerity, in the intuitive impulse that protects those in danger, in the revealing dream that awakens the seeker. The interdimensional order to which he served remains active, operating discreetly, hoping that more and more souls open up to collaborate. Not as followers, but as co-creators. Each awakened being becomes an emanation of Christ. Each act of love, an extension of cosmic intelligence. And when we understand this, everything changes. History ceases to be just a narrative and becomes a mirror. We realize that what was lived 2,000 years ago is what can be lived now. Christ's mission is continuous, fluid, vibrational. Jesus was its clearest expression, but not the last. He himself said that others would come, that the Spirit of truth would continue to act, that the voice of the Father would continue speaking. The question that remains is, are we listening? In the end, it's not about believing in a doctrine, but about remembering who we are. Understanding that there is a field of love, wisdom, and light always available. Recognizing that the celestial voices continue to whisper, and that Jesus' mission, seen in the light of cosmic intelligence, was, and is, an invitation to expansion. A call to listen. A reminder that, behind the veil of matter, there is an invisible order, waiting for us to awaken. Now tell me, mind unfettered, if you also feel that someone has whispered something that didn't seem to come from this world, that you've ever heard a call in the silence or received guidance that you couldn't explain. What do you believe these invisible voices are? Have you ever had an experience where you felt that you weren't alone, even with no one around? Share your experience, intuition, or even doubts in the comments. Here, your voice is part of our collective vibration. Let's manifest together a field of expansion where each comment strengthens this network of consciousness. Remember, when you comment, you're not just participating in a conversation. You're anchoring a frequency. You're helping others awaken too. If all this has ignited something within you, then the next step is inevitable. Click right now on the video that is appearing on your screen. The Brotherhood of Light, the secret knowledge of Jesus that history erased. There, we will explore the sacred alliance that upheld the teachings of Christ, and that was erased from history, but not from cosmic memory. Are you ready to reconnect with this wisdom? Because if you've made it this far, it's because you too are part of this circle of light. Until the next dive, mind unfettered, we meet in the invisible.